So we are slowing down on the rolling in, but there's still some folks rolling in. So let's officially get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Archiv's AI 104 webinar. And this is part of a bigger series that we've been going through on analytics and data and the AI kind of ML space. Today, we are going to be talking about the strategic value of data. And we have Jeremie Blais with us, and he's Archiv's Director of Advanced Analytics. He's got many years in the analytics and data space and is definitely an expert in his field, so lots to share. He's been with us a few times in these presentations prior to today. We've also got Jason Hamm, our Director of Advisory Services, who again has lots of years in experience in consulting and advisory services and management consulting. So again, very experienced in his field, and it'll be interesting to have the two of them talk together about how kind of analytics and advisory services play together, particularly when it comes to the value of your data. Before we get into the presentation and before I throw it over to Jeremie to kick things off, I just want to go through a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, I wanted to say thank you to all of you for being here today during your lunch hour. I know everyone is busy and it's a busy time of year. I've been hearing that from a lot of people. So we appreciate you taking the time out to join us and be with us for this session. We will try and get you out of here before 1 o'clock and not take the whole hour. So what's going to happen is Jeremie and Jason are going to present for about 30 minutes, go through their presentation. Please feel free, as I said, to pop any questions into that little Q&A box. That's at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will have a formal question and answer period with Jeremie and Jason at the end of their presentation. So you can kind of, as questions come up, pop them in there, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. As I mentioned as well, this presentation is recorded, so it will be up on our YouTube channel sometime next week and able to kind of share with others who may be interested, as well as all of our past presentations. So AI 101, 102, and 103 are up on that YouTube channel. Feel free to check it out if you want to go back to any of those presentations. And we've also got a software development 101 presentation up there as well. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Danny Finch. I am Archiv's Marketing and Communications Director, and I will be moderating the panel, the question and answer with the panel afterwards. So again, thank you for being here, and I am going to throw it over to Jeremie to kick things off.
No, I think you're going to throw it over to Jason to kick things off.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Again, hopefully you can see my screen here, but we do have an agenda. So, and as Danny mentioned, we promise not to take too long and take you through. It's more to initiate some discussions. So our agenda today is we're going to look at getting to value. So the strategic value of data. So what does that mean? And preparation. I know not everybody likes talking about preparing and planning, but there is some preparation I think that we need to take into consideration. And then we're going to get into the market trends. And then also data as an asset. So I think that's an important topic in itself. And that could probably be its own session, but we'll touch base on it today. And then the value statement of data. And again, it kind of ties into almost that asset side. And then analytics and reporting. So how do we get there? What does that look like? And then define your approach. So what approach should you consider, and how would you maybe define your approach to getting to the point of leveraging your strategic data? And then again, what are the outcomes that most organizations are looking to achieve when they're looking at obtaining strategic value of your data? Okay, excellent. All right, so the strategic value of data. Everyone lately seems to agree there's value in data. It's a common theme, it's a common topic. It's happening quite often, and even today's turnout, I think, is a good representation of that. But there is a significant gap between wanting to obtain value and actually obtaining value. And we see this quite often. Everybody knows there's value there, but how do you get to it? What you think and what you want is not necessarily a straight line. It's typically a journey. So what we want to talk a little bit about today is how do you go on this journey in the most effective way? So that being said, getting into assessment and preparation, everybody's, I think, favorite topics. And this is kind of where, from the advisory services side of things, we do like planning and preparing and having strategic conversations about the next steps. But if you don't have a good understanding where you are today, how do you know where to go? And we see this way too often, where organizations and people are challenged. So where are you today? And then where do you want to be? And how will you get there? So basically what we're trying to get to, and what I would ask yourselves as an organization or as individuals, when you're doing some self-reflecting, understand where you are today so you know what the gap is to get to where you want to go, or at least what that next step will be. So one thing that the approach that we typically see and would recommend is understanding your people, processes, and data, and then technology. And you wonder why maybe those steps. So when you look at people, ask yourselves and do some self-reflecting and say, well, who do we have today and what skills do we have? Is our organization structured correctly in order to really look into data and obtain value out of it? And maybe where are there gaps, maybe in skill sets that you have? And when you look at the processes, so how do you operate today? How do you capture information, concatenate it, move it through your organization? What does this prioritization and decision-making process look like? That's going to be key as you go on this journey and you start looking into obtaining value out of your data. And do you know the value add of each process? Now, again, this doesn't have to be big and heavy, but there are some high-level questions you could ask yourselves, and it doesn't take long to answer those. And then when you start looking at data, so what information is your organization asking for today? What questions are you having challenges answering? And do you know where those sources of truth are and what processes are feeding that? And do you know the value chain of that data throughout your organization? Sometimes we're capturing information and we're not clear of what that value is. Maybe there's not a value statement there. So question yourselves on that. And then technology. So what technology are you actually using today to capture information and move it through your organization? Like, we always want to get to that, analytics and those reports, but how are you capturing information today and make sure it's value add? And to what degree are you leveraging your technology today? A lot of cases, you might have technologies not even being leveraged. And do you have the fundamentals in place to even store, capture, and retrieve data? And then this leads into, okay, well, maybe there's some gaps that you have today where you want to go. What are your technology gaps? So again, doing self-reflecting is, I think, going to be key to help prepare yourselves if you're not, whatever part of the journey you're on. And you can do this throughout. And it doesn't have to be big and heavy, as I mentioned. As you can see, that took just a few minutes to go through. So when you do that, you'll obtain also some quick wins, right? So what can you do tomorrow to move forward? And then you'll start identifying those value add opportunities and also cost saving opportunities. So then, okay, that leads into, okay, if you have some cost savings, what investment opportunities can you have? It's never, I would say, it still does take an investment. It's not a cheap endeavor, but there's ways that you can do it cost effective. And if you can obtain cost savings, that might help fund it in some ways. And then also, where are you going? So this in itself, by going through this exercise, very high level, gives you actual strategic data in itself to know how to move forward. So we'd highly recommend that, again, do some self-reflecting, understand where you are, where you want to go as one of the first steps. Now, to get into the next steps, Jeremie's going to take us through some market trends. Jeremie?
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. Appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for joining today. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your day. We're going to kind of tie the data pillars together we'll start with market trends. So one of the things that's been really interesting to watch is kind of what's going on with our client base, but not only that, more broadly in the market. And one of the big things out there is the proliferation of B2B SaaS platforms. So it's never been easier to go out there and have, a part of your business pick up a functionality or a product online. It's never been cheaper. They're all pay as you go, or generally tend to be that kind of that type of software. So what that means is a lot of organizations end up with multiple SaaS platforms, and there's always a need for integration between those platforms. So those platforms usually fall in broadly two domains: financial and operational. And it's really interesting when you look at what types of SaaS products organizations acquire, because the value of data is really at the intersection of data. And fundamentally what that means is the intersection of those platforms. So a lot of these tools come with their own data suites, but they're really bespoke to the product that you're buying, right? So if you buy a financial product, like if you're using QuickBooks or whatever, QuickBooks comes with its own P&L reporting and blah, 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 all of those things. And that's great. It does what it's supposed to do. But really, what organizations need to do is intersect that data with either operational data or some other aspect of their business, right? So we're all kind of familiar with these tools. I'm talking like QuickBooks, Dynamics, HubSpot, Salesforce, SAP, Oracle Cloud, you name it. And it means that data is sort of living everywhere across multiple vendors. And that presents another challenge. And that challenge is data ownership. So organizations need to kind of manage that risk from the SaaS vendors. And this means indemnifying yourself against something bad that might happen to that vendor. So, we've had clients lose critical vendors to ransomware. That is most definitely a big thing these days. There are vendors that go out of business, or vendors that simply don't provide the data. So there's a very strong desire and need to control and to own your data. I mean, in order to control your data destiny, you have to take control of your data. And that basically means preserving optionality. Kind of the next part of that is data products. And this is interesting because we generally, a lot of folks tend to think of this as, oh, this is what Apple or Google or whoever does, right? But it's becoming a lot more mainstream. And we see clients asking their vendors to provide the data along with the physical services that they provide, right? So if you're a services company of some kind and you're doing a job for a client, either give me a report or give me the raw data feed, or tell me what you can about the job. And that's sort of, it used to be kind of a nice to have, but it's becoming much more of a prerequisite. And that becomes really interesting because we see clients preferring the vendors that provide that additional information or even raw data for the services they're providing. Like everybody basically wants their data, right? You can flip to the next slide, Jason. One of the things that we've been talking to a lot of folks about is reframing data and reframing data as an asset, right? So I think what we're trying to accomplish today is to give people who are on the call a bit of a framing mechanism to think about some of these tactics and strategies a little bit differently. And one of those is, if you frame data as an asset, it helps you position your initiative. It helps you kind of think about it. It helps you sell it externally and internally, that sort of thing. So that sort of bleeds into internal and external data assets. So if you're doing something internally, say like understanding how well you've done a job, if you've done it on time and on budget, what went well, what didn't go well, you need to know those things internally, but there's value in providing that to your customers externally as well. Sort of the second piece of this is data moats. And data moats are interesting because if you think about what a business, how a business strategically looks at their market and how they behave, generally in the context of a business moat, you might create that moat or that defensibility with pricing, market share, sales efforts, or physical assets. So if you're a capital intensive business, by the nature of being capital intensive, you've sort of created a moat. Not everyone's going to go out and buy those things. But you can also do it with data. And like any other asset, you can use data as a moat as well. So this might be providing your customers with a data feed or providing them refined data or insights. And this is an opportunity to move up the value chain and provide a bigger moat. So two great examples of this are market insights. So you can know more about your market segment than your competition. That's always something every business should strive for. So, a good example of this for folks working in the resource sector is look at Enervis, right? That's the product they provide is market insights. But if you're operating in a broad market across the spectrum of clients, you, by virtue of working in that broad segment, know more about what's going on in the broader market than your individual clients do. And you can provide value there. The second side of that is client insights. And this is something, all big tech companies have been doing for a long time, but it's bleeding into the smaller businesses as well. So knowing more about your clients than they know themselves. So this is like client usage, client telemetry, understanding what your clients are really interested in. And this helps you identify and understand your client maturity. For example, if you gave your clients the raw data, would they know what to do with it? If you gave them a report, would they ask for the raw data? What are they really looking for? And that gives you an opportunity to kind of upsell your services in a way, right? Let's move on to the value statement of data. We're not just doing this for fun. There's a reason we're doing this. There's value there, as Danny mentioned at the start. Everybody knows it. So data exists in your organization as a product of how your business operates, which is why improving the internal business process operations is the easiest thing to do. It's kind of like native to what you're doing anyway, right? The more strategic wins, as I mentioned earlier, are at the intersection of data, or intersection of data and organizational functionality, if you will. And what that means is, it means that it's a little bit out of reach of the things that you're kind of doing anyway, because it's not the reason you're creating the data, but there's value there. So what that really means is working backwards from the outcome and really understanding, okay, well, what's within reach and how do I get there? And it might seem like a simple straight line, like the initial slide that Jason had, but it is very much not a straight line. The second kind of component there is the organizational and client value. And this is about finding out what insights might yield great return on investment from your clients. So organizationally, how do these things kind of fit into your strategic plan? One of the things that we've seen done really well, and I've learned from others, a lot of great people doing great work out there, is, most organizations have a strat plan. We're going to improve safety, or we're going to improve margins, we're going to improve revenue, whatever it happens to be, tying that data or those data initiatives to that strat plan, because, everybody's compensated or bonused or applauded for achieving the goals in that strat plan. And you can really kind of suss that out with the data, right? For client data products, it's about finding product market fit as well, right? Data origination, the headwaters of data, like the headwaters of operational data, lives in operational systems, just like financial data lives in financial systems, but it moves through the business. And the real challenge, like everybody's seen this with, the huge spread marks, and like, okay, well, how did you come up with that number? Oh, I don't know. Bob in accounting manipulated it, and that's our number. And that becomes really tricky, because that creates a bit of a trust problem, but it's all around people and process. It's not really so much around technology. People create the data. So building data products comes back to people and process, which sort of loops back into what Jason had been talking about earlier. And okay, well, if you sit down and you plan for some of these initiatives and you really kind of align those people and process, that makes this step much easier in understanding the origination, right? And then finally, the believability gap. And this is something that we published a blog post last year, and this challenge never really goes away. I'll maybe explain it in a little bit more detail. The believability gap is simply kind of a catch-22 of, I don't believe the data because the data quality is poor, so no one's using it, but the data doesn't get better because no one's using it, and we never get anywhere. And it's hard to get out of that crunch, right? Hard to get out of that gap. The next thing I want to talk about is another thing that we see fairly frequently, and I think kind of helps again, as a framing mechanism for understanding data projects specifically. And that's the difference between analytics and reporting. So there's a lot of common mistakes there. And I think the kind of the way to think about these two tasks are very related, but not really the same, right? So analytics is really the art of the possible. I know that it's a bit of a trope and it's a bit overused, but it's still very relevant. And this is really interviewing the people, interviewing the data, identifying the holes in the information. The largest gap there is, there's a clear, it's easier to manage consent within an organization as to what they want to do and what the art of the possible is. Where people or where organizations typically fall down is, okay, well, do I actually have the data to do it? And then it gets really uncomfortable with, are the people that are providing that data actually doing the thing that they need to be doing? And how do we go about improving that story? And it's really about telling a compelling story, right? So it helps you identify what you can and can't do. Some things are, just not worth the squeeze. And it's about showing value quickly. I mean, everybody wants to deliver value quickly and build trust, because at the end of the day, all of these things are about trust. Because if you don't trust the data, people aren't going to do anything anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And then reporting, and this is the fundamental difference. So reporting is you already know what you're doing, you already know what the outcome is, and you already know what the data is, and it's something that people are doing anyway, right? So this is a morning report, a daily report, a weekly report, your financial KPIs, whatever. Analytics becomes reporting. So you do something, you find value, cool, it works. I'm going to make this a thing that we do every week or every month or whatever. And you solidify that, right? So the important thing about reporting is that you build a habit around it. People trust the information and you overcome that believability gap, right? And then kind of the final pillar within analytics and reporting is really managing the transition. And I think from a kind of a codification point of view, this is where a lot of organizations kind of get lost a little bit, in that when you're doing the analytics stuff, generally, you're creating a big disaster under the hood, and that's intentional. It's like any other analogy that we wish to use. Like, you're creating technical debt, great, you prove something out, and then you decide to default on the debt and throw it away or pay off the debt. So managing the transition is about, okay, now I've found something of value. How do I now pay off that debt and move it into the reporting world, and then sustain it? And sustaining is very important. Jason, over to you.
Sure. So that leads into defining your approach, right? So great. Where do I start? So what it boils down to is, to start with, is who are the sponsors, leaders, and champions of an initiative? Because as you start to look at leveraging your information and data, that's a huge change management exercise to get to that point. So you need to make sure that you have proper sponsors, leaders, and champions throughout the organization to look at this and take it seriously, and also to understand what's of value and what's not to your organization. So, and define what works best for your organization. So when you're looking at taking an approach, look at it from a fit for purpose approach. So what fits your organization based on people, process, information that you have today, and technology. So you often hear, oh, well, let's look at agile methodology, or we're going to implement DevOps and go, oh yeah, we have some old waterfall, it's slowing us down. So you hear of all these terminologies and conversations, but I think it's oftentimes it's a mix of the different types of approaches. So look at what's a fit for purpose approach for your organization to move forward. And that leads into plan to fail fast. It's Google's mantra, and they have led by example, right? They're one of the most, I would say, one of the largest organizations in the world. So one of their mantras is to fail fast. So how can you put that into your plan, your cadence, how you go through this approach? How do you plan for that so that you can get to decision points faster, right? And then define how you can collaborate more effectively and efficiently. Because if you plan this again, you're aiming towards getting to those decision points. That leads into be able to pivot. So as you gain information and the more you learn and the more knowledge that you have, you will likely change direction. As we touched on at the beginning, it's never a straight line. It's typically a journey, or it might be a market trend that comes in and knocks your organization off to the side, or maybe you'll do a merger or acquisition. But you have to be able to pivot. So keeping that in mind when you're putting an approach in place, and as you learn and as you grow, there will be an evolution, but you'll still have to think about how can we pivot if we have to. And this goes back to creating a cadence, as I touched on earlier. So turn your processes into a habit. So if you're planning to fail fast, everybody's communicating more effectively and across the organization, how do you turn this into a cadence and a habit? So again, habits are hard to break, but they're also hard to create. But if you can create that, then you gain a lot of efficiencies, and then that becomes the culture in your organization. And you start looking at, again, leveraging information more effectively, and how can we gain efficiencies to get there? And that leads into opportunities to automate. So there's always predictable habits that can free up, I would say, smart people in your organization to do other more cost-effective activities, more value-add activities. So where can you automate? Sometimes that takes an investment, and that's where you have to look at, okay, is that a return on investment? But oftentimes, if you create those habits and you create a cadence, you'll be able to automate some of these things. And sometimes you'll see this even on the DevOps side, if you're doing any kind of integrations and development yourself. But where can you automate so that the mundane things can get taken care of with the predictable things? And ultimately, it's how do you work towards a company-wide ownership? It's not just IT, IS, or a vendor that you bring on. Oftentimes, we get caught up in looking at software, and it's always seen in an ideal light. It looks super easy to use and awesome. It's going to make my life and extremely easy, and our business is going to operate so efficiently. But this is not, again, just a vendor or software, and it's not IT or IS. This has to be a company-wide ownership and approach. And this is where it has to be collaborative as an organization. Often I've seen projects where, the software might get purchased, or ITIS goes off and does their thing. And then I've experienced it myself too. And where you bring it up, a month later, I got this cool thing to show people. And meanwhile, you didn't take them on the journey. They weren't part of that process, and you could miss the mark because things have changed. So I think it's very important to have that company-wide ownership, but that means there has to be that cadence, has to be communication across the organization to show information to help make relevant business decisions, and to be able to make a decision for where to go next and be able to pivot. So that's how looking at kind of defining your approach when you're doing, again, some of that self-reflecting. And these are maybe some guiding principles you can use as you're doing that. Jeremie?
Cool, thanks. So I'll talk a little bit about enablement. Originally, when we were putting this deck together, and we were thinking like, okay, well, it's about outcomes. And we've sort of reframed it to think a little bit more about enablement. Enablement is the foundation for outcomes. I mean, everybody is striving for outcomes, but that foundation just sort of needs to be there, right? So digital competency across the organization, it's a matter of increasing that digital competency for everyone, right? So all aspects of business are interdependent, which means it should be easy for organizations to sort of understand different functions within their own business, right? Information should be more readily accessible. It should be, everybody's looking to de-silo, right? So how do you de-silo? And that means you shouldn't have to be on calls all day asking other parts of the business what it is they do. It should be easier to figure out, right? That, of course, is very important for talent and capability, in that everybody knows, particularly in the tech space right now, the war for talent is very tight, and people do kind of come and go, right? So like, how do you manage that? The second kind of pillar there is, how do you move your organization up the data value chain, right? So, we've seen it forever, for a long time, where there's, certain functions of the business that operate entirely in Excel, and some folks are happy doing the same thing day in and day out. And it's very, repetitive, automatable work, if you will, right? Where, okay, well, there's higher value that humans can be leveraged for, right? Humans are novelty machines, and they can think critically. AI and ML can't. So I mean, like that, there will always be a place for the human there. So, leveraging the critical thinking of the people in your organization is really how you move them up the data value chain, right? That ties into the purposeful and meaningful work. You know what, at the end of the day, I've been in this space for 20 years, and at the end of the day, I get satisfaction in seeing people use the stuff that I've built or that the team has provided, or getting value out of it, right? Or are learning something, right? It's really very frustrating to learn some valuable insight and it doesn't matter or whatever, or, to do the repetitive task that, this is, a machine could do this, right? So I think that means a lot, particularly it's sort of come to light with, COVID and everybody working remotely and all that sort of stuff, where people associate a lot of their well-being and value proposition with what it is they do, both within the work environment and outside of it. So I think providing that within the work environment is a value add to businesses and keeping people happy, right? And then finally, reducing time to insight. And that's, kind of the core foundation of enablement. Like, people are looking for answers, they're looking for understanding, and how can you help provide that, right? So these are the end goals. These are the things that we look to provide in our projects. And please feel free to reach out to Jason or myself, or really anyone on the R-Curve team for that matter, if you want to learn a little bit more. But I think that's it for our presentation today. So we'll turn it over to Danny for questions.
Awesome. Good job, guys. Thank you. I am going to open the Q&A channel now. So I'm kind of watching it. If there are any questions from the audience members, please put those questions in that Q&A chat, and we will get to them. I see one coming in here now. So I think this could be for either of you guys. Where do you see gaps in client data projects? What are the most common gaps, and where?
You can take first stab, Jerry.
Sure. I'd say the largest gap, and probably, I don't know particularly why it is, but the largest gap is clients or organizations really understanding their data. There seems to be an over-reliance on, like, oh, we have this tool or we have that tool. Like, I mean, you can have, the Azure stack with Power BI. Oh, we got Power BI. We can see all these things. So that's great, right? But that doesn't provide the if you're not asking the right question, you certainly won't get the right answer. And I think the challenge there is that there's a lot of, okay, well, what is the right question to ask? And is there the right level of curiosity? And I think where that really tends to fall down is people tend to think like, okay, we have all of this information, but they never really quantify or qualify how bad it is and tactically what they need to do. And I think a lot of the challenge there is it gets really uncomfortable with some parts of the business where, like, oh, all of this accounting data is wrong. What's accounting doing? And it's much easier to point the finger at the report or the technology than to really be empathetic to the people or the process. Jason, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, you just touched on it. I think one of the gaps is understanding what people need to see, what your organization needs to see. There's almost that, that end goal, and when it's unclear, that's even a first step. It provides a challenge. You have a gap already. And I think the other gap is, as I touched on at the beginning, is understand where you are today, and then what is that first step? Because if you don't know where you are today and what your capabilities are and what's happening in your organization and what information is required this quarter or this month or today, you don't know what's going to take that next step. right? Are you taking a jump? Are you one step forward? Or are you jumping off a cliff, right? So I think understanding your current state is extremely valuable on how and what that next step looks like. So that's not a big leap or chasm. It's a step that you can take. And again, it doesn't have to be big and heavy. You know that people don't want to. I want best practice. We're going to adopt that. We're going to buy this technology or follow this process, and because it's best practice. Well, each organization is unique because of people, processes, the industry, and your clients you're dealing with. So just understand that a little bit better. And I think that's the biggest gap, is really understanding where you are today to know how to step forward.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So we've got another question here. Leveraging your data seems like a big project, especially with your presentation. Where do we start and how do we break this down into digestible chunks so we can fail fast?
Go ahead, Jason.
So that goes back to, I would say, the second slide that we went over. And that's, again, understanding, as I said, people, process, information in general, and technology. So just doing a quick inventory and those questions that I asked in the second slide, ask yourselves those questions or bring somebody in to help you ask those questions and organize that. And you can digest that in a short period of time. And you might not know what that looks like, a long-term vision. You might not get that out of that conversation, but what you will get is that next step at a minimum. Chances are you'll create a vision and some goals. I think you will get that out of those conversations, but you'll at least understand what that next step is and that's your fail fast. So take that next step. Where are we today? What did that do? What did that shift? What information do we have now to take the next step? Right. So it's like if you're, trying to exercise, it's like putting that first foot on the floor in the morning. Say that's the first step, right? To even going for a walk or a run or maybe a bike ride or something like that. It's very similar. But you have to understand where you're starting from to take that next step. And anything else?
Yeah, and I think further to your point about having sessions there, Jason. I mean, one of the things that we frequently see is that a bit of a conflation between strategy and tactics.
Yeah.
Where I want to boil the ocean. I want to do all these things with my data, and it's kind of like, no. You like what really needs to happen is you need to pick 5 things, figure out if you can do them. Are they, will they add value, or how do they add value? And go through the analytics process and the workshop and so forth to identify if you can do them, right? And like it's those small, tangible, small steps, baby steps, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. One foot in front of the other, right? Okay, guys, thank you. We've got another question here. So with the work you do for clients today at Arcurve, what do you see as the biggest barriers for clients to make great strategic use of data? And what are the biggest issues you see organizations and clients struggling with on their data use?
Oh, it's a loaded question.
Yeah, it is. I'll I guess start off by, I think I think you touched on it, Jeremy, it's boiling the ocean, right? We're trying to get to that perfect end picture a lot of times, right? We have this vision, and sometimes it's hard to articulate that and then also understand what that journey looks like to get to that vision. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges with the clients that I've been working with so far is, wanting to be there, but meanwhile, so again, you try to use some common, analogies, but if I want to lose 50 pounds, well, it's not going to happen tomorrow, right? But that's that future end goal. And a lot of companies want to be at that point. I want to be fit tomorrow so I can run a race. Slow down. Okay, let's take a breath. Okay, where are we today? And what's that next step? So I think that's it's over ambitious and not willing to learn more about, again, the organization as a whole and what is the true culture, because it is a change management exercise too, because you need multiple people to participate in multiple departments and your clients in some cases, so that you're getting the information to move that forward too. So I'd say, yes, have that grand ambition goal, but again, that self-reflective, where are we starting from? And then what is that next step? That's kind of what I think one of those biggest challenges. And I'm guilty of too. Like I love strategy and moving towards a vision, but sometimes you got to take a breath and take a step back. Jeremy?
Yeah, and I mean, like business strategy is in a sense sort of like AI and machine learning, where it's sort of the sexy stuff, right? It's the sellable stuff, and everybody's like, "Ooh, we want to do that," and it's like, you have some table stakes things that need to be sorted out first, right? And like understanding what information you have and where your business is really at. You know, like I mean, the people and the processes are really going to govern what the business can do more than anything else. And their ability to move on that, right?
Awesome. Thanks, Jer. Thanks, Jason. And we've got time for a couple of more questions. I've got another one here. So I'm a small organization. Can I also leverage this framework?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of great benefits to being small. You have less people. You have more flexibility. I mean, granted, you'll have less financial liberty, and failing has a higher consequence. However, if it's easier to align people and align the business, it's easier to set the habits. Like as Jason mentioned, like creating habits is really hard, exceptionally hard in bigger businesses. If you have a small business, it becomes part of your culture. It's easier to set the tone. And yeah, I mean, like I think that's where the outsized benefits are for smaller businesses, right? You don't have to be a big business to do a lot of this stuff. And particularly like just understanding your data and even doing like basic analytics, you don't have to be doing AI or machine learning to like show value in that space, right? Jason, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you covered that extremely well. And even with sometimes organizations might think, well, I need to make this big investment, right, in this SaaS application, or, bring in, heavy consultings to help me move through this. You don't really, like as Jeremy touched on, I think, look at what you have and where you are today, and then, what's that next step? And even if you're using QuickBooks or Excel or anything like that, as Jeremy touched on at the beginning, you're capturing data, right? So just have a look at that. What does that mean for your organization? Is it adding value? Is it important enough to keep capturing? And is it going to help you make an informed business decision or organization?
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So we've got time for one more before we close off here. And I've got one here. So if I were to make an investment, what would be the best technology to help if I had to pick one?
Jeremy?
Yes,
That's a loaded question.
Yeah, sure. I'll bite. But it's kind of what I said earlier. Like everybody likes to focus on technology because it's maybe a little bit more tangible and easier, right? But it all kind of comes back to like investing in people and process, right? I mean, investing in culture and habit is not to be understated, right? I mean, like it's a strange thing to invest a lot in software, but not invest a lot in people, culture, and process. And I think like those are the two pillars that drive it all, right? I mean, because the people in process feed the inputs to these projects, but then on the other end of the project, they are the outcome. You're in it's full circle, right? There's a virtuous circle that goes on there, right? And like the people execute upon the data. Like when they learn something, there's an insight, they take an action that facilitates the outcome. So, the ability to, tolerate failure and fail fast and pivot and trust the data and so forth really kind of comes down to like investing in people from a cultural point of view. Like, yeah, it's okay to fail. That's cool.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So that's about all we have time for, unless Jason, did you have something to add to that one?
No, I think that you covered that excellent, Jerry.
Awesome. So we're gonna wrap it up here. I just had a question in the question and answer about who to contact if people are wanting to explore taking next steps. So you can reach out to Jeremy or Jason directly. and maybe they can pop their contact information into the chat there. You can also find them on LinkedIn, or if you wanted to just kind of reach out to rCurve directly, it's info@rcurve.com. So I think that's on the next slide as well, the connect with us slide. But we will leave things there. Thank you to Jeremie and Jason for taking time to lead this presentation today. We hope you all found it informative, and